Hi, this is Jen Rubin, editor-in-chief of The Contrarian. Where in the world is Tim Mak? Well, he's in Kyiv, and he could not be with us at a more important time to tell us everything we need to know about that phenomenal, brilliant strike that Ukraine carried out. Tim, what exactly did they do? In other words, what was struck and how did they carry it off?
Well, Jen, this has been something that Ukraine has been doing since the very beginning of the full-scale invasion a few years ago, which is trying to do more with less, right? Ukraine has always been the underdog when it comes to this war. And so it's been pressured by Ukraine's superior number of people, by its larger territory, by its larger economy, by its larger military. And that pressure has forced a lot of different kinds of innovation. I cover and I run a publication in Ukraine that covers Ukrainian military technology. So obviously super interested in what happened. And what happened was the launching of Ukrainian drones that were snuck into Russian territory, which destroyed many of Russia's most important strategic bombing assets. And it's a really interesting story filled with subterfuge, and I can get into it a little bit more. But what it led to was the destruction of dozens. What we're hearing is more than 40 key Russian strategic bombers and other kinds of military aircraft. And it's a real blow on behalf of the Ukrainians and really highlighting some of the ingenuity Ukrainians are using, even though they're the underdog.
So how did they get the drones into Russia? What can you tell us about that?
So as the war has progressed, right, air defense has really been lined up along the border. And, radars and electronic warfare and anti-air defense have been lined up all across the border. And all the eyes are on the border. And so the Ukrainian special operations and secret services uh, hatched up a plan to sneak the drones across the border, not flying them across the border, but smuggling them onto Russian territory. From what we've been told so far by the secret services of Ukraine, they smuggled a bunch of these drones. They smuggled mobile wooden houses to hide these drones inside, and they placed these mobile wooden houses with the drones hidden inside under the floorboards. These trucks then moved them deep into Russia. Okay. And from that position, well beyond where Russia would have its eyes on, its border, they launched the attacks by remotely opening the roofs of these structures and had these drones take off and hit to devastating effect. What we're seeing is billions of dollars worth of damage on Russian strategic assets through this really interesting new method of drone attacks.
Do you know how many of these were snuck over the border?
We don't know, but we do know from the claim that more than 40 Russian planes across four different airfields were attacked. We know that the number must be well into the dozens,
Right.
and accounting for the possibility of there being misses or misfires or additional drones that would be necessary for surveillance. We're talking at least 50, if
Wow.
not more, in order to carry out this attack. But
And
what's
so,
important to know is the breadth of this, right? This wasn't a single
yes.
on a single target. This is four different airfields across Russia that were holding some of the planes that were being used to strike Ukraine on a nightly basis and taking out a major, these bombers are not small planes. These are the kinds of bombers that would be used in a hypothetical nuclear strike. So these are gigantic planes. One is called the Tu-95 Bear, to give you a sense of, how big these planes are. That's what we're talking about when it comes to the targets.
Wow. So when you see a strike that is hundreds, if not thousands of miles to the east, closer to Siberia than it is to Ukraine, what does that tell you about the Russian intelligence, the Russian defenses within Russia itself? Are they just asleep at the wheel? Were they just taken completely by surprise?
Well, here's the thing, if you're an underdog, you got to find creative ways to make the hits count, right? And they understood along the front line, there's a huge amount of air defense array, radars, electronic warfare. What if we hit them from a direction they weren't expecting by not by launching and then flying these things across the border, but instead smuggling them along the ground, which I presume is what they did, smuggling them in and then launching them from within Russian territory where they're not expecting it. That's the real ingenuity behind this plan. And it's the ingenuity that is frankly required when you're an underdog, really beaten out when it comes to the size of the foe that you're fighting. You just got to find, like that David slingshot move,
Yes,
uh,
yes.
the right shot from an unexpected place can really make a big difference. And I think that's the kind of that's the lesson from this whole operation, which was nicknamed, by the way, Operation Spiderweb, and took a year and a half to
Wow.
slowly plan and execute.
Is it possible that there are planted drones that still have not gone off? In other words, could there be another wave of these, or did they use up everything they had in this initial strike?
Certainly possible. One of the questions that was raised, we published the story at the Counteroffensive yesterday as soon as we learned the details of what was happening. And one of the most frequent comments on our story was, why did they announce this? Right? And why were they so public about it? Obviously, this is something that is raising a lot of morale in Ukraine today. A lot of people are very happy about this. But if there were more drones, you'd expect them not to say anything about it, right? Until at least all the drones were expended. So my expectation is that you won't, once you announce it, the surprise is gone, right?
Yeah.
And so my expectation is that the next surprise will be from a different direction.
Gotcha. Now, because that they were able to sneak these drones, which are Ukrainian built, as I understand, they were not dependent upon US intelligence. Is that right? And what's the significance of that, that they're able to carry out these actions really independent of whatever the Trump administration is doing?
Look, the thing about Ukrainian military technology is that it's really ingenious and it's relatively cheap. I've always said that the Ukrainian military technology that has been developed over the last few years is like the good enough technology, really
Yeah.
effective, really cheap. And so American military technology is among the most sophisticated and complex in the world. They do amazing things when it comes to firing multi-million dollar missiles and shooting down other multi-million dollar missiles. What the Ukrainians are really, really great at is doing a lot with not very much money. So we're seeing all across the front lines at this very moment, as we're talking, $1,500 FPV drones on missions all across this country. It is the kind of weapon of choice, now responsible for something like 80% of combat casualties on the Russian side. Um, the United States doesn't really operate in that general direction. The United
Right.
States operates on much more sophisticated, much more complex, much more expensive kinds of military equipment. So what we're seeing is Ukraine finding its own path on its own. And this is all sorts of lessons, not only for Ukraine, but also for the United States. Hey, can
Yep.
we achieve similar outcomes for less money? Do we really need this all these bells and whistles for everything that we do? Do we need to, one thing that the Ukraine war has shown is that these gigantic drones that the United States has, these Predator drones, for example, and these Reaper drones, the very large ones, they may just be very easy targets in a near peer conflict. Same thing for lessons learned in the Asia Pacific and what Taiwan needs to learn as they're thinking about their island defense, is lessons like this. And so Ukraine is managing to field all sorts of new technologies that is reshaping the way we think about cost, economics, and warfare.
Fantastic. What do you think the reaction in Russia is going to be now that they've been struck? Will this either change their perspective? Will this make them perhaps less optimistic about knocking Ukraine out? What does this do on the Russian side of the equation?
I'm not sure it changes the fundamentals of the war, right? I'm not sure it changes Putin's geopolitical thinking. I think the impact is actually, interestingly enough, more on the Ukrainian side, which is very much like uh, a needed boost to morale during a dark time. Things have been getting steadily worse as the war goes on, right? We're seeing more strikes in Ukraine. We're seeing hundreds of drones launched on any given night, and it is a scary time. It's a scary time here. And so, what this strike did was show that Ukraine can still reach out deep into Russian territory and destroy Russian assets. Russia still has the same goal, and Putin still has the same goal it does today as it did 2 days ago, which is the subjugation of Ukraine. What this shows to Ukrainians is that there are still really creative and interesting ways for the Ukrainians to hit back.
Last question as we reach the end of our time. The Ukrainians and the Russians are supposedly having additional talks. Does this change anything? And does this simply point to the conclusion that we always knew, that Ukraine is not simply going to give up and accede to Putin's dream of eviscerating its country?
Well, I guess there are a couple questions. One is the kind of longer term Ukrainian attitude towards peace, and then there's the question of whether Russia wants peace at all. And there haven't been any, I saw some very rather silly comments from officials in Washington, D.C. that the attacks on Sunday were some sort of escalation. Well, what I can tell you is that what I've seen here in Ukraine is civilian targets being hit on a near daily basis. And what I see is Ukraine striking at obviously legitimate military targets, military aircraft on military sites. I don't see this at all as any sort of indication that Ukraine isn't willing to have peace. Ukraine wants peace yesterday, and all that's required for that is for Russia to stop its invasion. I think that that tells you everything you need to know. I've been a kind of bearish on the negotiations, which I haven't seen a lot of genuine interest from the Russian side about. And it seems very much an indication that Russia is going through the motions as an indication to get Trump to withdraw from the process. When Trump threatens to withdraw from the process, Vladimir Putin and top Russian officials are like, "Be my guest. We're happy for you to withdraw. That's our hope and wish." They're not threatened by that at all. And
Yeah.
so their strategy, from what I can see, is just to try to make some hints towards diplomacy long enough for the man in the White House to give up or get frustrated or just walk away from it.
Well, this was good news. Hats off to the Ukrainians on ingenuity, on the David against Goliath. And perhaps this will invest some additional energy, optimism on the Ukrainian side. Thank you, as always, Tim. No one better to talk to us about Ukrainian military capabilities and strategies. So thanks so much. We'll look forward to having you next time.
Thanks, Jen.
Bye-bye.